So they're sequenced. People are trying to make sense out of them. They're aggregating these stories from all sorts of different places, all sorts of different tribes, all sorts of different times, and then trying to make them coherent without losing the content and without doing arbitrary editing. And so part of the reason that the Bible is full of internal contradictions is for the same reason that a dream is full of internal contradictions. Is if you impose too much coherence on it, you start losing the... Look, imagine that you have a impressionist painting. Well, it's messy and the image emerges, and you might say, well, we could replace that with a nice clean line drawing, or even a sequence of stick figures, and get the basic point across. It's like, well, you would, but you'd lose the richness. The unarticulable richness would be lost in the premature attempt to bring logical closure to the phenomena. And so, in fact, we know already that that's maybe the difference between dreams and waking thought. So, waking thought sacrifices completeness for coherence, right? So, whereas dream thought sacrifices coherence for completeness. And that's not something I'm saying arbitrarily. This is something that has been thought through by people who've been thinking this sort of thing through for a long time. Precise thought excludes too much. And imprecise thought is not sufficiently coherent. So we do both. Precise thought, left hemisphere, linguistically mediated, sequential, logical. Incoherent but complete thought, imagistic, emotion-based, right hemisphere. The right hemisphere even has a more diffuse structure. It's like the right hemisphere is trying to get a picture of everything. Now, it's not going to be a very detailed picture because it's a picture of everything, full of contradictions. But at least it's a picture of everything. And the left says that's not good enough for precise action. And it's not. So we'll narrow that to precision, but we lose the richness. But you need both. So there's an interplay. Well, the documents that the Bible is composed of are half dream and half articulated thought. And they have the advantages of articulated thought and the advantages of the dream, but also the disadvantages of both. So it's to the degree that it's articulated, it's in a dogmatic box. To the degree that it's a dream, it's still incoherent. But the problem is you have to move through the entire world even though you don't know it in detail. So you need detailed knowledge where detailed knowledge is necessary, and you need vague but complete knowledge where that's necessary. It's a very uncomfortable balance, but we have to face everything even though we don't understand anything completely. Now, Genesis, the first stories in Genesis are, what would you say? Unidentifiably ancient. God only knows how old they are. The story of Noah, here's an interesting thing. I know this guy he's a Kwakwa tribal member and an artist who lives on the tip of of Vancouver Island. And the culture he comes from is about 14,000 years old, something like that. And maybe it's been unbroken for 14,000 years, very long period of time. And he's not literate, this guy. Although he's very intelligent, has a great memory, and is also a great artist. And he's told me some of the stories that have come down through the Kwakwaka'wakw tradition. And he was educated by his grandparents who were original language speakers, and he's an original language speaker. So there aren't many people like that left. I think there's only 3,000 in his particular tribal group. They have a story that's the flood story, except it's canoes. And it isn't a dove, it's a crow, but the damn story is exactly the same. It's like, well, what the hell's up with that? In fact, at the end, it's not a canoe, it's a bunch of canoes that are tied together. And at the end, the canoes all break apart, and that's why there are people all over the world. It's like the story of the Tower of Babel, which I'm going to talk to you about today. So, the reason I'm telling you that is because the stories at the beginning of Genesis are extraordinarily old. Now, so maybe he tells the same story that we tell, making the presumption that we are the people who are part of this Judeo-Christian tradition, and I know that that's not the case for everyone. Either he's telling the same damn story and it emerged from a central point so long ago that it's 20,000 years or 30,000 years or maybe 50,000 years since we moved out of Africa, something like that, and the story has survived, which is certainly possible because you think, can an oral tradition survive that long? That's the wrong question. Oral traditions always survive that long. What's radical is that they disappear. We're the radicals. The oral tradition is something that stays the same generation after generation. So how much innovation do you think there is in a small tribal group? None. That's why they don't have advanced technologies. They stay the same. The stories stay the same. So the idea that they can be transmitted unchanged over thousands and tens of thousands of years is really not a debatable proposition. It's the norm. So either the stories emerged from a central source and have never been lost so that you can pick them up everywhere, or there's something about the stories that automatically regenerates themselves. And I suppose it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. It's like my nephew, when he perceived himself as a dragon-slaying knight. It's like, well, was that the continuation of an oral tradition, or was it something that he spontaneously come up with? And the answer is both. The pattern was there, he just had to see it, and he saw it and synthesized it and encapsulated it in his own imagination. Well, that's not much different than the oral tradition being unbroken. It's just a variant of the same thing. I mean, if you lose a story but everyone acts it out, you can reconstruct the story, right? And if everyone doesn't act it out, then the culture dies, because there's some things about the story that you have to act out if your culture is going to survive. That's the hypothesis. And then that would be, well, that would be where you would search for ultimate values. The stories that enable you as an individual to flourish in such a manner that your culture flourishes in a way to enhance your flourishing, right? That's the right way that you want to organize things. You know that's what you do inside a family if it's functioning well, right? The family functions so that every individual benefits from being in the family, and that strengthens the family. That's what Piaget called an equilibrated solution. Technically speaking, when he was looking for the origin of moral ideas, he came up with the idea of equilibrated state. And an equilibrated state is one, the three of you are in an equilibrated state if you all want to be in that state, and while you're in that state, the things that you're doing together work better and they facilitate each of your development. Right, so it's the stacking of a set of ethical propositions so that the individual benefits at the same time as the group. And you can increase that stacking. We could say, well, it's not only that. You want to organize yourself so that all three of you get what you want better than you would if you were alone, and so that you're healthy. And so the stacking also occurs all the way down the physiological chain. You want to be manifesting yourself in the world so that you remain as physiologically healthy as you possibly can. So your stress responses are properly balanced and all of that. And then maybe your equilibrated state is well enough developed so it doesn't just include the three of you. It extends outward beyond you into the greater community. And things stack like that. And that's, if they all get stacked up, every level is stacked on top of each other properly, you have an equilibrated state. And I don't think that that's any different than a vision of paradise. I think those are the same thing. So now the question is, well, can that happen? That's a whole different story. I mean, it happens in your own life at those times where everything comes together for you, you know. It's chaotic and then everything snaps together and you think, that's exactly right. And it's unstable, you can't maintain it, it fragments again. But that's what you're working towards. If you have any sense, you're working towards that constantly. And I think that's what music represents. It's this stacking of harmonious patterns, right, that are playing themselves out in being. And you watch how people respond to music. The orchestra is led by the leader. Every different individual plays his or her part. They're organized into string sections and horn sections and so on. So you get individual, subgroup, group, orchestra, leader. Then maybe you have people dancing. Well, so what does that mean? So maybe it's men and women dancing in front of that, like a Viennese waltz. So it's the the harmonious stacking of pattern being in the background, led by someone who's making sure that the time is in order, and men and women arranging themselves according to the patterns, right? And everyone has a wonderful time when that's happening. And it's acting out the proposition that all of these levels of being can be stacked up harmoniously at the same time. And everybody has a tremendously fun time while they're doing it. Maybe that's how you find a mate at a dance, and for exactly the same reason. It's an optimal place to do that. You see if there's someone that you can be with whom you can mutually act out the patterns of being. Well, we're all acting that out at a dance. We don't know what we're doing. We're having a good time. Well, yeah, that's a little glimpse of paradise. That's what that good time is. Now,